Why is Hades so replayable? That's the question I'm going to attempt to answer today, and given the pedigree of Hades, it shouldn't be too hard to answer. I'm going to make this a series though. I want to delve into games that I've played for a multitude of hours to figure out what makes them so replayable, and I'm going to start with Hades. I'm also going to try and stick to why the games are replayable rather than what makes them good. Sometimes the two go hand in hand, but I want to separate them as much as I can for the purposes of these videos. Anyway, let's get into it. In my personal opinion, Hades executes most, if not all, aspects of game design perfectly. But again, I'm not here to talk about why Hades is good, but I do think that certain elements of its perfection play a part in the replayability. For example, I think the level of polish we see in Hades makes it very easy to come back to. In my over 100 hours of playtime, I rarely encountered any bugs or glitches. I can't even think of any on the spot, and in so many sessions I know for a fact that the game worked perfectly. So I think the level of polish definitely has something to do with the replayability. It's harder to come back to a game that has things that stain its core gameplay loop, but Hades doesn't have any stains. It's spotless. In that same vein, mechanically, Hades is one of the least frustrating games I've ever played. Like any good hard game, when you die, it's your fault. When you take damage, it's your fault. I know Hades plays great on controller, but mouse and keyboard feel great too, and I know that's an element that makes me come back. Similarly to the polish, knowing that this game never frustrated me, only challenged me, means that there's no barrier to re-entry. The challenge remains there as pure as it ever was, with nothing tainting it. Another element of the game that makes it easy to come back to is knowing that the effort that was put into the early game, when it comes to characters, story, writing, it all continues into the late game. Characters will continue talking to you for quite some time, even when there's nothing left to say. You're still experiencing quality voice acting and writing, and it's nice to see that Supergiant didn't let an element like that get lazy in the late game. Okay, but now for some heavy hitters. We've spoken about the things that make it nice to come back to, but what are the big ticket items that make the whole experience? Well, I'd be an absolute dickhead if I didn't mention the soundtrack. This shit goes fucking hard, and is without a doubt one of the best soundtracks I've heard in a long time. Hades OST is on a whole nother level. Hades is in that tier of games of which you don't mute the soundtrack, instead you turn it up. You know how hyped I get when God of the Dead starts playing in the Hades fight, and then you have two other levels of it as well in its second and third phases, each getting progressively crazier? And that's just one piece. I didn't even mention Out of Tartarus, The Bloodless, or any of the boss music that plays. Is this really an element of the game that makes me continue to come back to it though? Yes. Not only does the soundtrack slap on its own, but every time you play Hades, you have the gameplay in the background perfectly complementing the music. I even made a Spotify playlist with my favorites from the soundtrack just to listen to. The next thing that makes Hades replayable is of course the phenomenal combat. This is what a hack and slash is meant to feel like. The snappy attacks are so well implemented with the movement of Zagreus. Somehow it all feels buttery smooth and crisp at the exact same time. Executing combos using your calls, dashing, specials, or unique weapon moves, it's also seamlessly done. I saw some psychopath in the Steam reviews say that the combat sucked, so I went back to look for it and found some even more psychotic reviews. This guy says, fun, just not fun for me, it's too repetitive and grindy. The graphics and voice acting is epic though. This guy has 0.7 hours on record. Die, repeat, get a little further, die, repeat, get a little further. Yeah, it got very boring after a while. After 0.6 hours? Just let us quit the game in boss fights, save the health if you need to. Just lost an entire run because I tried hard to quit. Immediate uninstall. I'm going to need a translator for that one. This guy did the smart thing and put a positive review in the negative reviews, telling people to stop looking at the negative reviews and just buy the game. Regardless, the combat in Hades is unmistakably some of the most fun I've had in any roguelike I've played, let alone any game I've played. Of course, the boons you get throughout the run make the combat awesome too, and there's a huge variety there, but when I think of what makes me come back, those aren't as big a selling point as some other things for me. Speaking of variety, while there are only 6 different weapons in the game, they each have 4 unique aspects, and this is plenty to ensure that each run will be different from the last. Each weapon and subsequent aspect also encourages a different combat style to shake up the gameplay too. And of course this keeps things fresh, making it easy to go run after run after run, constantly challenging yourself to use a new weapon or aspect. And the weapon progression leads nicely into my next point as well.
going to get you back for last time, you know.
You bear the Aegis so much.
To me, the constant challenge is what makes Hades replayable, and this challenge lies in using the different weapons. To upgrade each weapon, you need Titan Blood, and getting Titan Blood is tied to how hard you make your run. That's where the Pact of Punishment comes in and introduces heat. At 1 heat in that run, you'll get Titan Blood from beating Meg or her sisters, and then 1 from beating Hades. But once you've claimed them, to claim the next 2, you have to make your run harder, going up to 2 heat and 3 heat and on and on. Each weapon ties into the Pact of Punishment, so if you want to claim all the Titan Blood, you'll need to get good at using all the weapons. And this is what makes me come back the most, knowing that I can still increase the challenge of each run and yet be rewarded by it. But the real victory here isn't the resources you're rewarded with, it's being able to move on to the next tier of heat. Being able to move up in difficulty because you beat the last one. Knowing that there is another challenge you've now unlocked. Seriously, a few years ago I would see this system and run away. But as I begin to appreciate video games more and more, a constant challenge like this is exactly what I'm looking for. And of course, seeing those tangible results in the fact that I can now increase my Pact of Punishment level. So to me, this is the drug of Hades. Coming back to experience the same level of quality I experienced when I first started playing, the same amazing combat and soundtrack, and to purposefully make the game harder and to constantly challenge myself. In fact, I have a confession to make. I have 100% of the game on Steam, and while I don't have the 32 heat statue, the last piece I was missing was being able to beat Extreme Measures Hades. I hadn't been bothered to try until recently because I could just enable other things in the Pact of Punishment, and although it took me a couple tries, I did do it. And I think Extreme Measures 4 is going to be the standard for me going forward. That is why Hades is replayable. Thanks for watching. More videos coming. See you later.
Or night. I have no idea.